There were 8 chairs on that stage in Austin, each one carefully selected, each one filled. The event was called Tomorrow's Leaders, Today's Choices, a youth policy forum designed to showcase vision, spark conversation, maybe even go viral. The organizers had picked a perfect mix: young disruptors, seasoned thinkers, and a crowd full of students, policy nerds, and live streamers. 3 cameras streamed the event live. Another 4 recorded it for later. Everyone knew something might happen. That was the point. Jasmine Crockett sat in the center posture, poised, legs crossed, a navy blazer crisp as the morning. Her notepad sat untouched in her lap. She rarely needed it. Known for her calm precision, Jasmine didn't come to panels like this to prove she belonged. She came to remind people she never needed permission. To her left sat Karoline Leavitt, younger, sharper in tone. She had the energy of someone raised on political takedowns and cable news clips. She wore confidence like a coat-fitted, intentional, meant to be noticed. Her smile was charming but edged with challenge. Karoline didn't need to be rude. She just needed the cameras to keep rolling when she pushed a line. The moderator, a silver-haired radio host from Waco, opened with familiar questions: education policy, youth violence, the impact of TikTok. The panelists gave their talking points, some polished, some passionate, none surprising. Plenty of phrases like, "We need to have that conversation," and "Let's bring everyone to the table." Then the shift came. The moderator paused, looking around. "We've been talking about young people," he said. "But let's talk about where those young people come from. What did your parents teach you about leadership?" A simple question, but simple questions cut differently when identity is part of the answer. Karoline was quick to grab the mic. "I come from strong stock," she said with a light laugh. "My parents run a small business in New Hampshire. They taught me to speak my mind and never apologize for it." Jasmine nodded slightly. Polite, unmoved. She'd heard lines like that before. But then Karoline turned to Jasmine, and with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she asked, "So, Jasmine, where's your mom from? Africa?" The air snapped. A few people chuckled. Most didn't. It wasn't funny. Not really. The moderator blinked. One panelist looked down. A camera zoomed in slowly, sensing it had just caught a moment. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't answer. Not yet. Because from the very back of the auditorium, someone stood up. She stood from the very last row, past the cameras, beyond the media tables, behind the sea of college interns and press lanyards. A woman slowly rose to her feet. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stood, wrapped in a maroon shawl, with streaks of silver in her hair and her hands folded calmly in front of her. She stood like a page in a forgotten book, finally being read. No one had noticed her earlier. Not really. Now, no one could look away. The panel froze. The audience didn't shift. Even the moderator, mid-breath, fell silent. Karoline's smirk faltered just for a moment. She glanced toward the back of the room, confused. Jasmine didn't turn around. She didn't have to. She knew exactly who it was. Her mother. The same woman who used to iron her daughter's debate team blazer at 2 a.m. after finishing the night shift. The same woman who raised her on nurse wages, cleaned houses as a teen, and once told her, "Make them listen, Jasmine, but never raise your voice to do it." Now, that woman was standing, not as protest, as presence. The room hadn't heard a word, but somehow everyone understood. This was no longer about Karoline's attempt at a cheap laugh. This was about legacy unspoken, unshaken, undeniable. Jasmine finally reached for the mic. Slowly. Not like she was preparing a rebuttal, but like she was lifting something heavier than words. She didn't look at Karoline. She didn't look for permission. She looked into the room. "I could answer your question," she said calmly. "But that would mean accepting the way you asked it." Karoline blinked, trying to hold her smile. "You asked about my mother?" Jasmine continued. "Not to learn about her, but to reduce her to reduce me." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Her stillness held more power than volume ever could. "She's not from Africa. She's from Tuskegee, Alabama. But even if she were from Africa, I'd say it with pride. People leaned forward. No one moved. She cleaned houses as a teenager. She waited tables where she had to use the back entrance. She worked nights, raised me, and never missed a single PTA meeting. A quiet hum rippled through the crowd. And she's standing right there. Jasmine finally turned. Every eye followed her gaze. Althea Crockett didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just stood proud and still like she had been standing her whole life. And in that moment, no one doubted who the real leader in the room was. Jasmine didn't rush. She held the mic like it was something sacred. Her words moved like a steady current flow, deliberate, undeniable. "You wanted a joke," she said, eyes still locked forward. "But I came with a story." People leaned in, barely blinking. "My mother's name is Althea Josephine Grant," Jasmine said. "She grew up in Tuskegee, Alabama, in the 1960s. Her textbooks were hand-me-downs from the all-white school across town pages. Torn, names scratched out, answers already filled in." Someone in the back let out a soft exhale. "She once showed me a book she got in 3rd grade," Jasmine continued. On the inside cover it said, "Property of Jefferson High." She didn't complain. She read it twice. Karoline had stopped shifting now. She sat still, clasped hands folded too tight, eyes lowered but not closed. "When she was 12, Jasmine said, her voice dipping for the first time, "she watched her grandfather get turned away from the polling station, not because he wasn't eligible, but because they told him the ballot box had already closed. It hadn't." A hush rolled through the room like fog. "She was 16 when she marched in Montgomery," Jasmine said. "Not for headlines, not for cameras. She marched because the school cafeteria ran out of milk for black students 3 days a week while the white school down the road threw theirs away. She let that sink in." "She married young," Jasmine said. "My father was in the Army. He died when I was 8. Jasmine paused for a second, not for effect, but for breath. Her voice didn't crack. It tightened like someone balancing grief with pride. "My mom never remarried, never had the time. She worked nights, weekends, double shifts." Jasmine glanced sideways just briefly toward Karoline. "She never asked for a stage. She never got recognition. She didn't do it for applause. She did it because she knew the world wasn't built for her to succeed. Beat. But she made sure I had a chance anyway." Silence followed, not the kind you fill, but the kind you respect. Even the moderator, pen in hand, hadn't moved in minutes. "She taught me how to check the oil in my car," Jasmine said. "How to debate a room full of people twice my age. And how to tell my story before someone else tries to tell it for me." Karoline didn't speak. She couldn't, because Jasmine wasn't speaking to her anymore. She was speaking to the room, and every soul in it felt the shift. Jasmine didn't let the silence drag. She filled it, but not with volume, with weight. "You know what's interesting," she said, voice calm, eyes scanning the room. "When people ask where I'm from, I don't flinch, I don't pivot. But when they ask where my mother's from, and they mean it like a punchline, something inside me stops." Karoline's face had changed. The smirk was gone. Her expression wasn't defensive. It was something harder to carry uncertainty. "You didn't ask that question because you were curious," Jasmine said, still steady. "You asked it because you assumed the answer would make me smaller, or funnier, or easier to categorize." The room stayed silent. Not tense, not angry. Just alert. "That's not boldness," Jasmine added. "That's testing boundaries and hoping there's no consequence." Her voice didn't rise, but it pressed like truth pushing through skin. "My mom used to tell me, your silence will be misunderstood more than your voice will ever be respected. But she also told me, choose your moment. Make it cost something." Someone in the crowd whispered, "Wow." Another scribbled notes without lifting their head. "I'm not here to make everyone feel comfortable," Jasmine continued. "I'm not even here to be liked." Now she turned back toward Karoline just briefly. "I'm here because my mother made choices that gave me the right to sit in this seat. And when someone tries to flatten her story into a laugh line, I owe her more than silence." A pause. Then, "She wasn't born with much, but she had a spine made of steel. She raised me in a house where we didn't always have heat in the winter, but we had books and values and conversations, not always polite. Always real. The audience was fully locked in now. Heads tilted, pens down. No one scrolling, no one whispering. That's what leadership looks like, Jasmine said. Not tweets, not smug one-liners. Leadership is knowing when to speak and when to let silence say enough. There was a ripple of applause, a few scattered claps, but Jasmine raised a single hand. "Don't clap for me," she said. Her voice softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. "Clap for her. She's the reason I'm here." And she did it without ever needing to tear someone down to build herself up. The room turned again to Althea. She hadn't moved, but her stillness now felt different. Not just strong, sacred. Jasmine sat back slightly, mic still in hand. Not because she was finished, because what came next needed space. "She's quiet now," Jasmine said, nodding toward the woman still standing in the back. But she wasn't always. Every eye returned to Althea. Still. Silent. Majestic. Jasmine looked down for a beat, then raised her eyes again. "My mother," she said slowly, "was born into a system that told her no before she even knew how to ask. And still she kept asking." Someone near the aisle leaned forward, elbows on knees, barely breathing. "She once told me about a book she loved in 3rd grade, Jasmine said. The inside cover still had the stamp from Jefferson High because it used to belong to the white school. It was torn, half the answers already scribbled in. And she read it twice, not because she had to, but because she refused to let someone else's leftovers define her limits." Karoline shifted. Her pen was in hand, but she wasn't writing. "She was 12, Jasmine continued, when she watched her father get denied the right to vote. Not because he couldn't, but because a man at the door told him the ballot box had already been locked." A soft gasp rose from somewhere in the crowd. "And she never forgot that," Jasmine said. "She told me, 'You'll vote for both of us someday,' and I did." Jasmine's voice dipped soft, but never shaky. "She marched in Montgomery at 16, not for headlines, not because it was trendy. She marched because her school cafeteria ran out of milk for black students 3 days a week. And that," Jasmine said, pausing, "was reason enough." Even the moderator sat frozen, lips slightly parted, pen unmoving. "She married my father young. He joined the army. He died before I turned 9. She never remarried. She never had the time." Now, Jasmine's tone changed, quieter, deeper, more intimate. "She worked every shift they gave her. She made sure I had notebooks, even when we didn't have groceries. And still, she showed up at every parent meeting, every school play, every debate tournament." The room had stopped moving. "People call women like her strong," Jasmine said. But strength wasn't a choice. It was survival. She looked toward Karoline again, not in anger, not in triumph, just truth. "That woman," she said, "never asked for a stage. But tonight, the stage found her." And suddenly, the spotlight in the room didn't shine on Jasmine anymore. It settled on the woman who had never needed one. Jasmine didn't wait for applause. She wasn't performing. She was revealing. She adjusted the mic not for volume, but for clarity. "There's this idea," she said evenly, "that ignorance gets a free pass if it's dressed up as humor." Her gaze swept across the room. No one looked away. "They call it sarcasm, wit. They say, 'Relax, it's just a joke.'" Jasmine's tone sharpened, not louder, just more exact. "But it's never just a joke. Not when people like my mother live through the consequences of other people's punchlines." Karoline shifted again. This time, slower, heavier. "I've sat in rooms," Jasmine said, "where men in suits asked me, 'Where'd you learn to speak so well?' Like English was a compliment I borrowed." A ripple of recognition passed through the audience. "I've been called articulate," with a wink. "I've heard my braids described as urban chic. And each time I had to choose it, I speak up and make it awkward? Or do I let it slide and swallow it whole?" She scanned the crowd. "We make that choice every day, especially those of us who were taught since childhood to pick your battles." Silence. "But I've learned something," she said, her voice lowering. "Silence isn't peace. It's permission." A woman in the second row exhaled sharply. Jasmine leaned in. "When you asked where my mom's from," she said to Karoline, "you weren't looking for an answer. You were hoping for a reaction. Maybe something to clip, something that makes you look bold." "Beat." But boldness isn't saying something offensive and waiting for applause, Jasmine continued. Boldness is owning what you say when it falls flat. Karoline stared straight ahead now. Her hands were no longer clasped. They were clenched. And it fell flat, Jasmine said. Not because I said so, but because the room changed. You could feel it. The air was heavier, no longer polite. Silence, consequence, silence. I'm not here to cancel you, Jasmine said, tone cool but pointed. I'm not here to score points or chase headlines. I don't need you to apologize. She paused. What we all need, is for you to understand that your joke landed on a history you don't carry. Gasps weren't necessary. The truth didn't need an audience. Just space. Jasmine's words hung in the air like smoke. Slow, lingering, unavoidable. And in that space, something shifted again. Karoline had tried to spark a reaction, but Jasmine had given the room a reckoning. Karoline didn't speak. She couldn't. Jasmine hadn't raised her voice, hadn't insulted her, hadn't even demanded an apology. And somehow, that made it worse. The silence in the auditorium wasn't polite anymore. It was a verdict. No gasps, no boos, just stillness, heavy, measured. Karoline's smile had evaporated completely. What remained was a kind of blankness of person searching for control in a moment they no longer owned. She reached for her water bottle. Her fingers slipped. The cap clinked against the metal table. She took a sip not out of thirst, but desperation. Jasmine sat back, the mic resting lightly in her hands. But her presence still filled the space. The moderator cleared his throat, hoping to pivot. All right, we'll take a few questions from the audience. But it was already too late. Karoline stood, slowly, mechanically. She didn't speak to the crowd, didn't address the moderator. She simply gathered her notes still blank, her phone, her pen, the half-empty bottle. Then she turned toward the stairs. The audience didn't stop her. No one called her name. Even the cameras hesitated, unsure whether to follow her or stay on Jasmine, who hadn't moved. Her heels clicked against the stage-own sharp step after another, louder than they should have been. She descended the side stairs quickly, but not rushed. She didn't slam a door. She didn't run. She simply left. Someone whispered, "She really walked off." Another murmured, "Wow." No laughter, no celebration, just acknowledgement. Jasmine didn't glance at her once. She remained focused in the audience, on the students in the front row, on her mother still standing in the back like a monument that refused to be moved. The moderator tried again, this time gentler. Let's take our next question. A young woman in the crowd stood up, maybe 19, holding a notebook that trembled slightly in her hands. "This is for Congresswoman Crockett," she said. "How do you stay centered when you know someone's trying to diminish you?" Jasmine looked at her for a long moment. Then, finally, she smiled just a little. "I remember who I'm really talking to," she said. "It's not always the person throwing the insult. Sometimes it's the person watching from the back row, wondering what they would have done in my place." She nodded toward the girl, toward the crowd. "Sometimes it's you." That was how Jasmine held her ground. Not with fire, with focus. And Karoline's absence now echoed louder than any words she could have said. The next hand raised wasn't hesitant. It came from the middle row firm, visible, trembling just slightly. A young woman stood, college-aged, shoulders squared, voice unsure, but rising. "I just wanted to say," she began, eyes on Jasmine, "I've never seen someone handle something like that with so much grace. I didn't grow up seeing women who looked like me speak like that, so thank you." Jasmine didn't respond right away. She didn't rush to fill the space with polite gratitude. She breathed. And when she did speak, her voice was calm, clear as glass, but heavy with meaning. "Thank you for saying that," she replied, eyes warm. "But don't thank me for doing what should have never been necessary in the first place." That landed like a stone in water. No splash. Just ripples deep, wide, unforgettable. "I've sat on panels," Jasmine continued, "where people talked over me, ignored me, called me articulate like it was a surprise. Soft nods moved through the crowd like a wave. But what I want young people, especially young women, to understand is this. You don't have to match ignorance with anger. She paused, steady. You don't even have to match it at all. The room was silent again. This time, not because it was uncomfortable, but because no one wanted to miss a single syllable. You just have to keep showing up as yourself, unapologetically. She turned slightly toward the moderator now, widening her reach. We talk about leadership like it's something polished, like it wears a suit, speaks in sound bites, holds degrees. Her tone didn't accuse. It revealed. But the best leaders I've ever known didn't have microphones. They led from kitchen tables, from church vans, from hospital break rooms, from wherever they were needed. She looked back at the crowd. My mother never had a college degree, Jasmine said, nodding again toward the back of the room. But she gave me things no degree could teach: discipline, self-respect, and the ability to walk through rooms not made for me and still take up space. The audience leaned in out of curiosity now, but commitment. And what I want every young person watching to remember is this. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait to be invited. A girl near the aisle wiped her eye. Just show up. Jasmine smiled, softly, for the first time fully. And when someone tries to reduce you to a stereotype, she lifted the mic just slightly. Tell the truth loud enough to be remembered. The room felt different now, not because the tension had vanished, but because it had evolved. What started as a confrontation had become something larger, deeper, a reckoning wrapped in grace. And still, Jasmine's mother stood. Althea Josephine Grant, silent, tall, unshaken. She hadn't spoken a single word all night. She hadn't needed to. Her presence had said enough. Until now. As Jasmine lowered the mic, something shifted in Althea's posture. Her head tilted not in exhaustion, but in readiness. She stepped forward just slightly, her hands still folded before her. And then, without a microphone, without permission, she spoke. Her voice was soft, but it reached every corner of the room. She was born with a voice, Althea said. I just made sure she never forgot how to use it. Gasps, audible ones, not out of shock but reverence. The kind of reaction reserved for truth so deep it doesn't need to be explained. Jasmine turned toward her mother, eyes glistening, not with tears but with awe. She nodded just once. I never forgot, she whispered. No one clapped. Not yet. Not because they didn't want to, but because something sacred had just landed, and no one wanted to trample it. Even the moderator, now little more than a witness, sat frozen. The pen in his hand remained still. Althea sat down slowly for the first time that evening. Her body moved like a final page being turned, not because her role was finished, but because her message had been delivered. Jasmine turned back toward the audience, letting the moment settle. Then, her voice returned softer, now, steadier. This wasn't about politics, she said. It was about legacy. And with that word, something clicked for everyone watching. This is about what kind of world we leave behind, she continued. Whether we raise children who fear being mocked for their roots, or children who rise and own them. Now the crowd rose not in a rush, but like a tide to gradual, unified, certain applause erupted. Not wild, not chaotic, just full. Like an exhale after holding something too long. Althea met Jasmine at the edge of the stage. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They embraced tight, brief, eternal. And for a fleeting second, the stage didn't belong to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. It belonged to the woman who had raised her. And to the truth, neither of them ever had to shout to make unforgettable. The auditorium didn't empty the way most do. No rush for the doors. No buzz of post-event chatter. People lingered. In the aisles. In their seats. Near the back, where Jasmine's mother had stood. It was as if the room itself refused to forget. Jasmine and Althea stood side by side near the edge of the stage, their hands briefly clasped. No cameras followed them now. No spotlight. Just two women on who had built the foundation, and one who had stood on it when it mattered most. A student reporter approached, notebook trembling. Congresswoman, she said, may I ask just one more question? Jasmine nodded gently. The girl cleared her throat. What do you hope people take from today? Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't even pause. That silence, isn't always safety, she said. And dignity isn't silence. People around them leaned in again one last time. Sometimes, Jasmine added, dignity is standing without saying a word. Other times, it's speaking when it would be easier not to. She smiled. Not for press, for peace. Then she stepped off the stage. By morning, the clip had already gone viral. Not the entire forum. Just that one moment, Karoline's question. Jasmine's stillness. Althea's rise. It spread not because it was dramatic, but because it was clear, clean, sharp, felt. In Kansas City, a black mother showed it to her teenage daughter over breakfast. In Albuquerque, a community college professor played it before class and asked, "What does real respect look like?" In Toledo, a young woman saved it to remind herself how to hold her ground with grace. Because the story wasn't just Jasmine's, it was a mirror. We've all been Jasmine at some point, targeted, tested, underestimated. And too many have also been silent when a Karoline walked into the room. But Jasmine hadn't shamed anyone. She hadn't canceled. She told the truth and let the room carry the weight. And her mother? Without a title, a podium, or a microphone, she reminded the world, sometimes the most powerful resistance is standing, refusing to shrink, refusing to play along. That was the legacy Jasmine spoke from. That's the legacy we build or break every time we open our mouths. So here's the question Jasmine left hanging in that auditorium, even after the applause faded. When the moment comes, and it will you stay seated? Or will you stand? Because someone will always be watching. A daughter, a student, a stranger in the back row. So speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. And when you don't do it for applause, do it so someone else knows they can too.